Trash like you needs to learn respect, the words thick with cheap coffee, and self-importance hung in the humid Alabama air. Officer Daniel Carter's face, a fleshy mask of contempt, loomed over her. His breath was a foul mix of stale cigarettes in power. Behind him, the setting sun bled across the horizon, painting the lonely stretch of interstate in hues of orange and purple. A beautiful backdrop for an ugly scene. It had started moments earlier, a single, almost imperceptible weave within her lane as she reached for her water bottle. That was all the pretext Carter needed. The flashing red and blue lights exploded in her rear-view mirror. A predator's signal. She had pulled over immediately, hands placed visibly on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, following protocol. She herself had helped write Special Agent Dr. Olivia Grant, currently in civilian clothes. A simple but elegant navy silk dress in low heels was on her way back from a consulting lecture at a major university. She looked like a professor, a lawyer, maybe a well-to-do professional to Officer Carter. She looked like prey. He had swaggered to her window, his hand resting on the butt of his holstered weapon, a classic intimidation tactic, license and registration. He had barked, his eyes roaming over her car, a modest but well-maintained sedan, before settling on her face with a dismissive sneer. He had not asked if she knew why she was pulled over. He did not care. Evening, Officer Olivia had said, her voice even and calm. She handed over her documents, her driver's license. Read Dr. Olivia Grant. He glanced at it, a flicker of something annoyance, disbelief crossing his face. Doctor, huh? He scoffed. What are you, a doctor of witchcraft? His partner, a younger, leaner officer named Blake Turner, snickered from the passenger side of the cruiser. Olivia ignored the jibe. Is there a problem? Officer, problem is you people think you own the road. Carter spat, driving erratic, weaving all over. Probably drunk or high. He sniffed the air theatrically. Going to need you to step out of the vehicle, ma'am. It was a command, not a request. Olivia complied without a word. Her mind a cold, calculating machine. Every detail was being recorded, filed away. The time, the location, the officers' badge numbers. Carter 542 and Turner 639 were already seared into her memory. She stood on the gravel shoulder, the stones digging into her heels as Carter circled her like a shark. You got something to say for yourself? Or are you just going to stand there looking all high and mighty? He taunted, getting closer. I have nothing to say, officer. I was not driving erratically. That was the wrong answer. Carter's face darkened. He saw her calm demeanor, not as compliance, but as defiance. It was a challenge to his authority, to the little kingdom of his patrol car in this stretch of asphalt. You got a real mouth on you, you know. That he jabbed a thick finger toward her face. Think that fancy dress makes you better than me. He glanced at the passing cars, their headlights illuminating the scene for brief flashing moments. A small audience was gathering. Perfect. He loved an audience. I am going to search your vehicle for contraband, he declared, without probable cause. Without consent. Officer, you do not have my permission to search my vehicle, Olivia stated clearly, her voice unwavering. You have no probable cause? That was the spark that lit the fuse. Carter's eyes went cold. It was one thing for her to be defiant. It was another for her to know the law, to throw his own rule book back in his face. He saw it as the ultimate act of disrespect. You want to talk about rules, he growled, his voice dropping low and menacing. I will teach you a rule. He lunged forward. His left hand grabbed a fistful of her dress at the collar, the rough knuckles scraping against her skin. His right hand seized the fabric at her waist. Olivia's training screamed at her to react, to drop him where he stood with a precise, disabling strike. But she held back. The mission was more important. The bigger picture was everything. She became a statue. Her eyes locked on his, a silent observer of his self-destruction. Trash like you needs to learn respect with a grunt of exertion. He ripped the dress downwards. The sound of tearing silk was shockingly loud in the twilight air, like a gunshot. The navy fabric gave way, exposing her slip and bra from her collarbone down to her stomach. It was not about finding a weapon or contraband, it was about humiliation. It was a public stripping. A raw and brutal assertion of power meant to shatter her dignity, to leave her feeling small and exposed on the side of a busy highway. The passing cars slowed their occupants, gawking at the scene. A woman in a torn dress, a sneering cop, the flashing lights painting a tableau of degradation. Turner, his partner, simply watched from the cruiser, a faint smile on his face. He did not intervene, he never did. Carter shoved her back against her car, the metal cool against her bare back. Now, he panted, his chest heaving. Am I clear? Do you understand your place now? Olivia. Grant looked at the man who had just assaulted her, who had just tried to break her. Her expression did not change. The cold, analytical part of her brain was noting the sweat on his brow, the slight tremor in his hands from the adrenaline, the way his eyes darted to the traffic. Feeding off the attention, he thought he was teaching her a lesson. He had no idea he was the one in school. He had just handed Special Agent Olivia Grant, lead investigator of the Federal Investigation Bureau's sweeping corruption probe, into this department. The final undeniable piece of evidence she needed. He had torn her dress, but he had just ripped his own life to shreds. The fluorescent lights of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Precinct hummed with a monotonous, sickly buzz. The air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee disinfectant and the faint metallic tang of desperation that clung to every surface here in this beige and brown fortress of local law officer Daniel Carter was king. He sat at a worn metal desk, tapping away at an old keyboard with two thick fingers, a self-satisfied smirk plastered on his face. He was crafting a masterpiece of fiction, turning the evening's thuggery into a textbook case of heroic police work. His partner, Blake Turner, perched on the edge of the desk, swigging a lukewarm soda. You should have seen her face, man. Turner chuckled, looked like she was going to cry. Then just nothing weirdest. Damn thing, it's a front. Carter grunted, not looking up from the screen. They all learn it, act all calm and collected, then scream about their rights and sue the department. I have seen it 150 times, he typed another sentence. His brow furrowed in concentration. Suspect identified as Olivia Grant became verbally abusive and belligerent after being stopped for reckless driving. It was a lie, polished by years of practice. The narrative was always the same, only the names and faces changed. The suspect was always agitated, the officer always feared for his safety. The use of force was always the minimum necessary to subdue a non-compliant individual. So what is the charge? Turner asked, peering at the screen. Resisting obstruction of justice. And I am adding assault on a law enforcement officer, Carter said. A gleam in his eye, she tensed up when I went to detain her. Felt like she was about to strike me. He flexed his hand, as if remembering a struggle that never happened, had to restrain her. Her dress got torn in the struggle, a real shame. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. He was not just covering his tracks, he was salting the earth. He was building a case so damning, so filled with official jargon and feigned professionalism that any complaint she might file would be dead on arrival. It would be her word, the word of an erratic, belligerent woman against the sworn testimony of two decorated police officers in this county. That was not a fair fight. It was a foregone conclusion. The desk sergeant, a grizzled veteran named Sergeant, Henry Cooper with a face like a collapsed road map, wandered over. What you got? Daniel, another one, Carter said, leaning back in his squeaky chair, pulled over a real piece of work on the interstate mouthy entitled, "Thinks she is better than everyone had to put her in her place." Cooper glanced at the report on the screen and nodded slowly. He did not ask for details. He did not question the assault on an LEO charge that Carter tacked on to nearly every confrontational stop. With a person of color, he was part of the system. A cog in the machine that allowed men like Carter to flourish. His job was to process the paperwork, not the truth. "Her car has been impounded," Turner added, tossed it top to bottom on the roadside, found nothing but the report. "We'll say we had probable cause based on her behavior and the smell of, let us say, marijuana." "Good," Cooper grunted. "Keep these troublemakers off our streets." He lumbered back to his desk, the conversation already forgotten. Carter finished the report with a flourish. He described how Dr. Grant had screamed obscenities, how she had made threats against my family, and how her aggressive posture necessitated her immediate arrest to ensure public safety. He painted a picture of a woman completely unhinged, a dangerous element that he, Officer Carter, had bravely removed from society. He read it over one last time, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. It was perfect, airtight, another win for the good guys. While Carter was writing his novel, Olivia Grant sat in a small, windowless holding cell. They had given her a thin grey blanket which she had draped over her shoulders, covering the torn dress they had not taken. Her mugshot or fingerprints yet, the precinct was busy and she was considered low priority. They thought she was just another angry woman who would eventually break down, cry and plead. They were wrong. She was not angry. Anger was a hot, messy emotion, and Olivia Grant was cold, precise, and methodical. She sat perfectly still on the hard bench, her back straight. Her mind was a whirlwind of activity. She replayed the entire incident from the moment the lights flashed to the feel of Carter's knuckles on her skin. She analyzed their words, their body language, their procedural errors. The illegal search of her car was a gift. The fabricated report, which she knew he was writing, would be perjury. The corroborating testimony from Turner would be conspiracy. Carter thought he was building a cage for her. In reality, he was forging the bars of his own. She could hear them through the thin walls, their casual laughter, the camaraderie of shared corruption. They felt safe here. This precinct was their sanctuary, the place where their version of the truth was the only one that mattered. They had no idea that their sanctuary was under surveillance. They did not know about the quiet federal investigation named Operation Keystone that had been running for 20 months. An investigation she was leading. They did not know that for the last year a specialist team from the Federal Investigation Bureau's technical division had been monitoring their communications, tracking their patrol cars, and flagging their reports for patterns of misconduct. Carter had been their prime target from the beginning. They had mountains of data on him. Statistical analyses of his racially biased traffic stops, financial records showing unexplained income, even whispers from confidential informants about his involvement in shaking down local businesses. But they needed something direct, something undeniable, something on camera that would strip away all plausible deniability. Tonight, Carter had not just assaulted a woman. He had assaulted a federal agent during a sanctioned federal operation. He had not just torn a dress. He had ripped a hole in the blue wall of silence, and she was about to walk right through it. He had written his report. Soon she would write hers, and hers would be the only one that mattered. The interrogation room was designed to intimidate. It was small, painted, a nauseating shade of pale green, and smelled faintly of sweat and fear. A single steel table was bolted to the floor, flanked by 2 chairs for the interrogators, and 1 for the suspect. In the corner, a small black dome housed a camera, its dark lens an unblinking eye. This was where the will of suspects was meant to be broken, but Special Agent Olivia Grant was not a suspect, and her will was forged from something far stronger than the steel of the table. She sat calmly, the grey blanket still draped over her shoulders, her posture as straight and unyielding as a queen on her throne. She had not touched the styrofoam cup of water they had offered. She had been in this room for nearly an hour, a deliberate tactic to let anxiety and uncertainty fester on her. It had no effect. She used the time to meditate, to center herself, to sharpen the focus of her mind for the battle to come. Meanwhile, in an adjacent office, Detective Daniel Whitaker, a senior investigator with a tired face in a rumpled suit, was taking Officer Turner's official statement. Whitaker was a decent cop, or at least he had been once, but years on the job had sanded down his sharp edges, leaving a man who preferred the path of least resistance. "So walk me through it again." Turner, Whitaker said, his pen hovering over a notepad. "From the moment you initiated the stop." Turner now separated from. Carter's swaggering influence was slightly more subdued, but his story was a perfect echo of the fabricated report. "Yes, sir." We observed the vehicle, a grey sedan driving erratically, failing to maintain its lane. We initiated a traffic stop for public safety. The driver, she was immediately hostile. "Hostile." "How?" Whitaker prompted, his voice flat. Just the look in her eyes. "You know, refused to answer basic questions, kept talking about her rights." Real lawyer, like when Officer Carter asked her to step out, she became even more agitated, started accusing us of harassment. Turner was a better liar than Carter. His performance was more nuanced, more believable. He sounded almost regretful. "And the assault charge?" Whitaker asked, his eyes not leaving Turner's face. "Daniel, Officer Carter went to place her under arrest for obstruction." She flinched, tensed up real hard like she was about to swing at him. He moved a block to restrain her, and in the struggle, her dress got torn. It was unfortunate, but she was fighting him the whole way. It was a lie from beginning to end, but it was the lie. The system was built to accept. It was one officer's would backing up another's. Whitaker had heard versions of this story hundreds of times. Most of the time, he just wrote it down and moved on, but something about this case felt off. The suspect was a doctor, no priors, no record of any kind. And she had been eerily, unnaturally calm when they brought her in. And you witnessed all of this. Whitaker pressed a little harder than usual. You saw her tense up, as if to strike him. A flicker of hesitation in Turner's eyes a split second, but Whitaker saw it. "Yes, sir, I saw the whole thing." Officer Carter acted with professional restraint. She was completely out of control. The hesitation was gone. The wall was back up. Whitaker sighed internally. He knew Turner was lying. He did not know the specifics, but he could smell the dishonesty. Like cheap cologne still proving. It was another matter. It was Carter and Turner against a woman with a torn dress. He closed his notepad. "All right, Blake. That will be all for now. Do not discuss this with anyone." As Turner left, Whitaker walked to the one-way mirror overlooking the interrogation room where Olivia sat. He watched her for a long moment. She was not pacing, she was not crying, she was not showing any of the typical signs of distress. She was just sitting there, perfectly composed, as if she were waiting for a meeting to begin. Her stillness was more unnerving than any outburst could have been. He and his partner, Detective Carlos Morales, entered the room. The air shifted. Olivia's eyes, sharp and intelligent, met theirs. She did not look like a criminal. She looked like she was in charge. Dr. Grant Whitaker began sliding into the chair opposite her. Morales took the other, setting a thin file folder on the table. "My name is Detective Whitaker. This is Detective Morales. We need to ask you some questions about the events of this evening." Olivia offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Officer Carter's report states you were driving recklessly, that you became belligerent and abusive, and that you assaulted him during your arrest. That is a very serious charge. We would like to hear your side of the story." This was the moment where most people either broke down or launched into a rambling emotional defense. Olivia did neither. She looked from Whitaker to Morales, her gaze analytical. She was not just looking at them, she was assessing them, reading them. "Before we discuss the events of this evening," she said, her voice clear and measured, devoid of any fear or anger. "I have a few questions for you," Whitaker blinked. "This was not standard procedure. We are the ones asking the questions here, ma'am." "I understand," Olivia replied, her tone unwavering. "However, my questions are procedural and pertain to the integrity of this investigation, which I am sure you are both keen to maintain. First, is this room's audio and video recording system fully operational and currently active?" Whitaker and Morales exchanged a look. "Yes, of course," Morales said. "Excellent," Olivia continued, as if ticking off a mental checklist. "And are your precinct's digital evidence files, including all dash cam and body cam footage, uploaded to a secure off-site cloud server in real time as mandated by the federal grants your department received in 2020 for equipment upgrades?" The air in the room grew heavy. The question was so specific, so technical. It was not the question of a panicked civilian. It was the question of an expert. Whitaker leaned forward, a frown creasing his tired face. "Ma'am, I do not see what that has to do with it. Has everything to do with it?" Detective Olivia interrupted, her voice still calm, but now carrying a new weight, a hint of steel, because your officers have filed a report containing multiple felonious falsehoods. A report that will be directly contradicted by the complete, unedited digital evidence. So my final question to you is this: are you entirely certain you want to attach your names to their fabricated report before you have had a chance to review that immutable evidence for yourselves? She leaned back in her chair, the grey blanket falling slightly to reveal the raw, torn edge of her silk dress. It was no longer a symbol of her humiliation in the harsh, fluorescent light of the interrogation room. It looked like a battle scar, a warning. The two detectives stared at her, the gears in their minds grinding to a halt. The unbreakable will in front of them was beginning to crack, the very foundation of the case they thought they were investigating. The silence that followed. Olivia's question was thick and suffocating. It was no longer the silence of a suspect waiting to be questioned. It was the silence of two veteran detectives realizing they had profoundly misjudged the situation. They had walked into the room expecting to break a civilian. Instead, they had run headfirst into a wall of calm, calculated intelligence. Detective Morales was the first to recover, attempting to regain control of the room. "Look, Dr. Grant," he said, his voice a little too forced, a little too casual. "We are just trying to get the facts here. Officers Carter and Turner are respected members of this department. Their report is detailed. Their report is a work of fiction." Detective Olivia stated, not as an accusation, but as a simple, undeniable fact. "And you know it." Whitaker held up a hand, silencing Morales. He leaned forward, his elbows on the steel table, his eyes locked on Olivia. He had been a cop for 22 years. He had seen real criminals, real victims, and a whole lot of people in between. The woman in front of him fit no category he knew. "What is it you are not telling us, Dr. Grant?" he asked, his voice low. "On the contrary, Detective, I am trying to tell you everything, but you have to be willing to listen," she replied. She ignored the file on the table that contained Carter's report. Her focus was entirely on them. "Let us talk about that report. It alleges I was belligerent, yet I assume Officer Carter's dash cam, which would have been active from the moment he initiated the traffic stop, recorded our entire verbal exchange. Did you review that?" Audio Detective Whitaker glanced at Morales. They had not. They had taken Carter's report at face value, as was standard practice. "The report claims I assaulted Officer Carter." Olivia continued, her voice dissecting each lie with surgical precision. Assault requires intent and action. The dash cam footage, which captures a wide-angle view of the stop, will show. My hands were at my sides, empty, and that I made no threatening movements, will it not? Sometimes footage does not capture everything, Morales countered weakly. The angle might not show. Then let us discuss Officer Carter's body camera, Olivia said seamlessly. Moving to her next point, it would provide a first-person perspective. It would show exactly what I was doing, what he was doing, and the proximity between us. Of course, I am certain you have already placed that footage into a secure evidence locker untampered with. She let that last phrase hang in the air, a clear insinuation in a department with a corruption problem. Evidence had a way of malfunctioning or disappearing. The seeds of doubt she had planted were now sprouting into full-blown anxiety. Whitaker and Morales were not just questioning their suspect anymore, they were questioning one of their own. They were beginning to see the gaping holes in Carter's story, holes that could swallow their own careers if they were not careful. Let us move past he said. She said. Whitaker said, changing tactics. Why were you out on the interstate tonight? Where were you coming from? Olivia gave a small, dry smile. I was returning from a professional engagement in a major city. What kind of professional engagement? I was a guest lecturer at a major university's symposium on forensic psychology and law enforcement ethics. She said, her tone level. The detectives exchanged another uneasy look. A lecturer on police ethics. The irony was so thick it was almost laughable. This was getting worse by the second. And your car, Morales jumped in, trying to find a solid footing. Officer Carter's report indicates a search was conducted based on probable cause due to your erratic behavior and the suspicion of narcotics. Another fabrication, Olivia said calmly. I explicitly denied consent for a search. There was no probable cause making the search illegal. Anything found, though, I can assure you there was nothing to find, would be inadmissible under the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine. I am sure you are both familiar with it. She was quoting legal doctrine to them in their own interrogation room. Whitaker felt a headache beginning to form behind his eyes. He had a sinking feeling that he was a pawn in a game he did not even know was being played. Carter had not just arrested some woman. He had stepped on a landmine. Dr. Grant, Whitaker said. His voice edged with frustration. You are obviously intelligent, you know the law, but right now you have two sworn officers saying one thing and you are saying another. In this building, their word carries a lot of weight. Does it? Detective Olivia asked softly. Does the word of an officer with 19 citizen complaints filed against him in the last 5 years, 13 of them for excessive force and racial profiling, all of which were dismissed internally, truly carry that much weight? Morales's jaw dropped slightly. Whitaker went pale. That information was not public. The specifics of an officer's complaint. Jacket were confidential personnel records. How could she possibly know that? Who was this woman, I think? Olivia said, her calm voice now resonating with an authority that seemed to fill the small room that you have been given a false narrative by a compromised officer. I think you are smart enough to see that the question is, are you brave enough to act on it? She leaned forward slightly, because this investigation is proceeding with or without your cooperation. And right now, you are on the wrong side of it. I suggest you get your station chief. I believe he and I have a great deal to discuss. She then did something that cemented their fear. She looked directly at the camera dome in the corner of the room, and you might want to tell him to hurry. It was not a request, it was an order. Whitaker stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the concrete floor. The room felt like it was shrinking. The walls closing in. He looked at the woman in the torn dress. Her gaze as steady and powerful as a lighthouse in a storm. and for the first time in a long time, he felt a genuine sense of fear. Not for his safety, but for his career, his department, and the catastrophic mess Daniel Carter had just dragged them all into. He nodded at Morales. "Get the chief station." Chief Harold Lawson was a man who believed in order. His office was immaculate, his uniform was always pressed, and his worldview was neatly divided into two categories: cops and criminals. He had run the Jefferson County Sheriff's Precinct for a decade with an iron fist in a simple philosophy. Protect your own, when Detective Whitaker paged him with a situation in Interrogation 2. Lawson was more annoyed than concerned. He was halfway through his paperwork, and looking forward to getting home, he strode down the hallway with an air of weary authority. He had seen it all. Hysterical suspects, slick lawyers, hardened criminals. He assumed this was just another one that needed the chief's touch, a little bit of gravitas in a thinly veiled threat to scare them into compliance. He pushed open the door to the interrogation room without knocking. "All right, what is the problem here?" He boomed, his eyes immediately landing. On Olivia, he saw a woman in a torn dress in a cheap blanket. He saw a problem to be managed. "I am Chief Lawson. I hear you have been giving my detectives a hard time." Olivia Grant looked up at him. She took in the perfectly creased uniform, the polished badge, the aura of absolute certainty that surrounded him. This was the man at the top of the pyramid, the man who had allowed the culture of corruption to fester, who had signed off on every internal investigation that cleared Daniel Carter. "Chief Lawson," she said, her voice even. "Thank you for joining us. Please have a seat." The casual authority in her tone took Lawson by surprise. He was the one who told people to sit. He remained standing, asserting his dominance. "I am not here for a chat. I am here to inform you that you are facing serious felony charges. Assaulting an officer is no joke in this county. My advice to you is to stop playing games and start cooperating." Olivia held his gaze. "The only person who has been playing games, Chief, is your officer, Daniel Carter, and the only person who was assaulted tonight was me." Lawson let out a short, humorless laugh. "That is not what the report says. I have the sworn statement of 2 officers. You have a purged statement from a corrupt officer and a coerced statement from his partner." Olivia cut in her voice, slicing through his bluster. "A statement you are about to become an accessory to. If you continue down this path," the temperature in the room seemed to drop. 10 degrees. Detective Whitaker and Morales stood by the wall, looking like they wanted to be anywhere else on Earth. "An accessory." Lawson scoffed, though a flicker of unease crossed his face. "You are in no position to be making threats, ma'am. This is not a threat, Chief. It is a professional courtesy," Olivia said. She slowly, deliberately reached into the small handbag they had allowed her to keep. After searching it, it contained only her wallet and a tube of lipstick. Her movements were fluid and precise. Lawson tensed slightly. A conditioned reflex, she placed her wallet on the steel table. It was a simple black leather wallet. She did not open it immediately. She let the moment hang in the air, forcing all of them to focus on that single object. For the past 20 months, Chief, the U.S. Department of Federal Justice has been conducting a joint investigation with the Federal Investigation Bureau into patterns of civil rights violations, corruption, and racketeering within this department. The investigation is code-named Operation Keystone. Lawson's face went rigid, his bravado evaporated, replaced by a mask of disbelief. "You do not know what you are talking about." "On the contrary," Olivia said, her voice now carrying the full weight of the federal government. "I know exactly what I am talking about. I know about the falsified reports, I know about the illegal seizures of cash from motorists on the interstate, and I know about the kickback scheme with the local towing company, and I know that Officer Daniel Carter has been the primary subject of this investigation since day 1. She finally flipped open the wallet inside, behind a clear plastic window. Was not a driver's license, it was a gold-plated badge, intricately detailed with the seal of the Federal Investigation Bureau below it. Clear black letters spelled out her identity. "My name," she said, her voice quiet but echoing like a cannon in the small room, "is Special Agent in Charge, Dr. Olivia Grant. I am the lead investigator for the Federal Investigation Bureau's Civil Rights Enforcement Unit. On Operation Keystone, the terrible truth landed with the force of a physical blow." Chief Lawson staggered back a step, his hand instinctively going to the wall for support. His face, moments before flushed with authority, was now the color of ash. Whitaker looked like he was going to be sick. Morales simply stared, his mouth agape. They had not just arrested a citizen, they had arrested the federal agent who was investigating them. Officer Carter had not just pulled over a random woman he had assaulted, the one person on the planet who had the power to dismantle his entire world. The torn dress was not evidence of her crime. It was now Exhibit A in a federal case against them all. Olivia looked at the three stunned men, their power and certainty shattered into a million pieces. "Now," she said, the steel in her voice now unmistakable. "I believe I requested a phone call an hour ago. You have two options. You can give me my phone so I can call my team, or I can wait for them to execute the federal search warrants that are being signed by a judge. As we speak, either way, Chief, your precinct is about to become if Daryl crime scene. The choice is yours, Chief." Lawson stood frozen for a full 10 seconds, his mind struggling to process the cataclysm that had just unfolded. The name Operation Keystone was a phantom. He had heard whispered in paranoid late-night calls from other chiefs, a rumor of a federal boogeyman looking to make headlines. Now the boogeyman was sitting in his interrogation room wearing a torn dress and holding the fate of his department. In her hand, Detective Whitaker was the first to move. He scrambled to retrieve Olivia's personal effects from the evidence locker, his hands shaking so badly he could barely work the keypad. He returned with her phone, her watch, and the contents of her handbag, placing them on the table with the reverence of a religious offering. "Thank you, Detective Whitaker," Olivia said, her tone professional, almost kind. She was already differentiating between the collaborators and the foot soldiers. She picked up her phone, the screen lit up with dozens of missed calls and encrypted messages from her team. She ignored them and dialed a single number from memory. "Grant," she said into the phone. A pause. "Execute full protocol." "Yes, the package is secure." "I am the package." Another pause. "No, I am fine. Just bring a change of clothes." She ended the call and placed the phone face down on the table. "You have 5 minutes, Chief," she said calmly. "I suggest you instruct your entire staff to be cooperative. Tell them to secure their weapons, place their hands where they can be seen, and not to interfere in any way. Any resistance will be met with the full force of federal law." The threat was clear and absolute. Lawson, a man used to giving orders, could only nod. Mutely, he stumbled out of the room, his voice, when he finally found it, a hoarse croak as he barked orders over the precinct. Intercom. A wave of confusion and panic began to ripple through the station. The first sign of their arrival was a low, thumping sound that grew into the unmistakable chop of helicopter blades. Then the screech of tires through the one-way mirror. Olivia could see the precinct's parking lot, suddenly flooded with black, unmarked SUVs. Doors flew open, and a dozen figures in dark, tactical gear, FIB emblazoned in bold yellow letters across their chests, poured out. They moved with the silent, efficient brutality of a wolf pack. The precinct doors burst open. Federal Investigation Bureau. "Nobody move!" The command echoed through the station, freezing every local officer in place. Olivia's second in command, a sharp, no-nonsense agent named Agent Ryan. Nolan entered the interrogation room. He took in the scene, his boss in a blanket, the torn dress, the pale faces of the detectives, and his jaw tightened. "Ma'am," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Are you injured?" "I am operational." "Nolan," Olivia replied. She stood, letting the blanket fall to the floor. The full extent of Carter's act was now visible to her team. A collective intake of breath came from the agents gathered at the door. "Secure this room. Secure all digital and physical evidence related to my arrest and find me. Officer Daniel Carter and Officer Blake Turner. I want them separated and placed in interview rooms. They are not to speak to each other." "Yes, ma'am," Nolan snapped, turning to issue a flurry of orders. The precinct was transformed in seconds. What was once a local fiefdom was now a federal crime scene. Federal Investigation Bureau. Agents swarmed the building, their movements coordinated and precise. They took control of the evidence locker, the server room, and the communication center. Local cops who had been joking and laughing an hour before now stood with their hands on their heads as federal agents collected their phones and service weapons. The power dynamic had not just flipped, it had been completely annihilated. Nolan returned with a garment bag. "Your clothes, ma'am." "Thank you, Ryan," Olivia said. She took the bag into the small attached restroom. A few minutes later, she emerged, transformed. She was now dressed in crisp black pants, a functional blouse, and a blazer, with the FIB seal embroidered on the pocket. Her hair was pulled back neatly. She was no longer a victim. She was the one in charge. She walked out into the main bullpen, the heart of the precinct. The scene was one of controlled chaos. Her agents were cataloguing evidence. While the local officers watched their faces a mixture of fear and resentment. She saw Carter and Turner being led away in handcuffs, their smug arrogance replaced with sheer terror. Carter saw her. His eyes widened in disbelief. He saw the woman from the roadside, but now she was surrounded by federal agents wearing a look of cold, implacable authority. The pieces finally clicked into place in his slow, hate-filled mind. "You," he stammered, his voice cracking. "You cannot do this. I am a cop." Olivia stopped and turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "No, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "You were a cop, now you are a defendant in a federal civil rights case. There is a difference." She walked over to Chief Lawson, who was standing beside his desk, looking like a ghost. At his own funeral. "Chief Lawson," Olivia said, her voice all business. "I am going to need your full cooperation. We have warrants for every file, every computer, every piece of paper in this building. We are going to conduct a full audit of your department going back 12 years, my department." Lawson whispered, "It is over, no?" Olivia corrected him, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces in the room. "The part of your department that believed it was above the law is over. The rest is about to get a second chance to do the job right." She turned and walked toward the conference room, which her team had already converted into a temporary command center. The predators, so confident in their concrete and steel jungle, had become the prey. And the hunt had only just begun. The precinct's main conference room, once used for morning briefings and stale donuts, was now the nerve center of Operation Keystone. Laptops glowed, portable servers hummed, and evidence boards were covered in a complex web of photos, names, and connecting lines. Special Agent Olivia Grant stood at the head of the long table. A tablet in her hand across from her sat a shell-shocked Chief Lawson and the two detectives. Whitaker and Morales, who now looked more like prisoners than lawmen. "Let us get started," Olivia began, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion. "For the past 20 months, my team has been building a case against this department. What happened to me tonight was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a deep-seated disease. A disease you, Chief Lawson, allowed to metastasize. Under your command, she tapped her tablet, and an image appeared on the large monitor at the end of the room. Officer Daniel Carter's official department photo. He was smiling. Confident, let us talk about the man of the hour, Olivia said. Officer Daniel Carter. 16 years on the force. 19 official. Citizen complaints, 0. Disciplinary actions. She swiped, and a list of names and dates filled the screen. In 2017, he was accused of breaking the arm of a teenager, Brandon Reed, during a stop for loitering. The case was dismissed internally. When Brandon, facing trumped-up charges of resisting arrest, agreed to drop his complaint, Lawson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He remembered the case he had signed off on the dismissal himself. Olivia swiped again in 2019. A woman named Laura Ortiz accused Carter of illegally confiscating $2,500 in cash. During a traffic stop, the money was never logged into evidence. Her complaint was deemed unfounded due to a lack of evidence. We found the evidence, Chief. We have financial records showing a $500 cash deposit into Carter's personal bank account. The very next day, the room was silent. Whitaker and Morales were staring at the screen, their faces grim. They were cops who worked with Carter every day, yet they were only now seeing the full, ugly picture. But Carter is just one piece of the puzzle. Olivia continued, her voice relentless. He is a product of the culture you fostered here, a culture of impunity. She brought up a series of charts and graphs, data visualizations of arrest records, traffic stops, and use of force incidents. My analyst ran the numbers on your department's activities. Officers in your precinct are 5 times more likely to initiate a traffic stop against a person of color than a white person. They are 7 times more likely to use physical force against a minority suspect. She pointed a laser at a specific bar on the graph. And Officer Daniel Carter, he is off the charts. 89% of his arrests in the last 3 years have been of non-white individuals in a county. That is 65% white. This is not policing, Chief. This is a targeted harassment campaign. Olivia paused, letting the damning data sink in. We knew all of this, she said softly. We had the statistics, the financial records, the informant testimony. But in a court of law, a defense attorney could argue it away. They could claim bias, misinterpretation of data. We needed something more. We needed something irrefutable. We needed to catch him in the act on camera in a way that left no room for doubt. She looked directly at Lawson, so we set up a scenario. We received intel that Carter was particularly aggressive at the end of his shift, especially when he had not filled his quota, so to speak. We knew his patrol route. I was an unarmed, lone female driver in a non-luxury vehicle fitting the demographic profile of his previous victims. The only difference was that this time, the victim was wearing a wire and her car was equipped with 3 high-resolution concealed cameras. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This was not a random stop that a Federal Investigation Bureau agent happened to be involved in. It was a sting. She had been the bait officer. Carter did exactly what our profile predicted he would do, Olivia said. He manufactured a reason to stop me. He was confrontational, abusive, and when I asserted my constitutional rights, he assaulted me and destroyed my property to humiliate and intimidate me into submission. She played the video on the monitor. It was crystal clear. Footage from a camera mounted on the dashboard showing Carter's sneering face at her window. Then she switched to the side view camera. The whole room watched in horrified silence as they saw Carter lunge, as they heard the sickening rip of silk as his vile words, trash like. You needs to learn respect, filled the room, and just in case there was any doubt, Olivia said, her voice like ice, we have the complete, unedited audio and video from his own dash cam and body cam, which were being remotely mirrored by my technical team in real time. There will be no malfunctions, no lost footage. She turned off the monitor, plunging the room into a heavy silence. The traffic stop was never random, Chief. It was the final damning act in a long and sordid career of corruption. He thought he was making a powerless woman an example. Instead, he made himself the poster child for a federal RICO case. Olivia looked at Whitaker and Morales. You two have a choice. You can continue to be part of this cover-up and face federal charges for conspiracy and obstruction of justice, or you can become witnesses for the prosecution and tell us everything you know. She then turned her attention back to Lawson. As for you, Chief, your career in law enforcement is over. The only question now is whether you will leave it in handcuffs or with a resignation letter. I would advise you to start writing. 8 months later, the fluorescent lights of a federal courtroom felt a world away from the humid Alabama highway. Daniel Carter stood before the judge no longer in the crisp, authoritative uniform of a police officer, but in the drab, ill-fitting jumpsuit of a federal inmate. The swagger was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed terror. The man who had built his career on intimidation was now small, broken, and utterly powerless. Special Agent Olivia Grant sat in the front row of the gallery, not as a victim, but as a witness to the final act. She wore a simple professional suit. The picture of composure, she was there to see it through for herself and for all the others who had never gotten this chance. The judge, a stern, silver-haired woman named Judge Patricia Green, looked down at Carter with an expression of profound disappointment. Mr. Carter. She began, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom. You took an oath to uphold the law. Instead, you became a law unto yourself. You wrapped your personal prejudices in the American flag and called it policing. You were not a guardian. You were a predator with a badge. The evidence had been overwhelming. The video of the assault, the years of data-back corruption, the testimony of a dozen other victims who had been emboldened to come forward, and the full cooperation of Detective Whitaker and Morales had painted a picture so damning that Carter's defense had crumbled in hours for your crimes. Judge Green declared deprivation of rights under color of law, perjury, obstruction of justice. This court sentences you to 18 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. A choked sob escaped Carter's lips as the gavel fell with a crack of finality. It was over his life as he knew it was over, as he was led away in chains. His eyes met Olivia's for a fleeting second in them. She saw not remorse, but the final sputtering embers of his impotent rage. He still did not understand. He thought she had been the cause of his downfall, never realizing he alone was the architect of it. But Carter's conviction was just the beginning of the reckoning. Operation Keystone had eviscerated the corrupt leadership of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. Chief Lawson had resigned in disgrace and was facing his own indictment. Officer Blake Turner, for his cooperation, received a reduced sentence of 3 years for perjury. 11 other officers were fired and charged with various crimes. The department itself was placed under a federal consent decree, a sweeping mandate for reform overseen by the U.S. Department of Federal Justice. The changes were tangible. New leadership was brought in, training was completely overhauled with a new focus on de-escalation and constitutional rights using a curriculum. Olivia herself helped design a civilian oversight board was established, giving the community a real voice in how they were policed. For the first time, the county settled a multi-million-dollar lawsuit with the funds distributed among Carter's many victims, a small measure of compensation for the dignity he had stolen from them over the years. Months after the sentencing, Olivia stood once more on that lonely stretch of interstate. The sun was setting just as it had that evening. Painting the sky in the same brilliant colors, in her hand she held a small square of navy blue silk, a piece of the dress she had kept. It was not a reminder of her humiliation, but a symbol of a promise fulfilled. It was a testament to the idea that the darkest moments can often lead to the most profound changes. The system was not perfect, but it was not completely broken either. Sometimes it just needed a catalyst, a person with the courage to stand firm, to absorb the blow, and to turn the force of that hatred back on itself until the whole rotten structure collapsed. She had been that catalyst. The torn dress had been the spark. The fire that followed had cleansed the rod, and now something new had a chance to grow in its place.